All right, so I just started recording. Um, so this specific volume profile I'm looking at, like I was just saying, this is volume average with the 50 moving average. And it's helpful because you can see if the volume's greater than that 50 moving average. So it's helpful as far as finding triggers. It's just one more confluence point. And so if we go to our studies, basically I'm going to be sharing stuff with you guys that I don't know that Shorty will necessarily be sharing with his Discord. I don't really know how to put it into perspective, but I have friends that have taken classes from Shorty, and I don't want this to sound like I'm taking a shot at Shorty, but when you teach something, it's really hard to make sure you touch on every point with everybody. And so, me and my buddies that have taken the class with Shorty, we kind of exchanged notes and filled in gaps on things that like he didn't cover with me, and things that he didn't cover with my other friends. I filled them in on to just trying to kind of get a like a overall picture. With the new Discord, Shorty is going to be doing a lot of teaching. There'll be a lot of education. So I'm sure over time, if he happens to forget to mention something, it will come out later. Cyber, you haven't missed anything. Are you in here? Yeah, he's in here. Okay. So the only thing I've talked about so far is this volume profile with the 50 moving average on it. It's just one more confluence point, and we'll go over this more in a second. But this one here is available to everybody. If you go to your studies, edit studies, and here, I'll just take it off. But if you type in volume, if I could spell, volume average, it'll come up, and then you just add that, apply, okay, and you'll have that down there. And then this is volume with the 50 moving average. And one more thing with Shorty, he really highly recommends reading that book. I don't remember the exact name of it, but something about volume by Anna Cooling. Really, really, really good book. If you just learn volume only, if you learn how to watch volume, you can be a successful trader just by following the volume. So really, really important to know and understand volume. I'm still getting through the book myself, but you start to recognize things like if we look right here on this candle, we have a big green candle, we have a volume spike. But then after that, the volume starts going down and our stock goes flat. So this is not a great example, but once you go below that 50 moving average, you're probably good to get out of the trade there. And at this point on this trade here, we would have already had 2 trims, and you can happily get out of the trade here. But again, we'll go over more of this in a minute. So a few things I want to touch on just as far as making your screen clear. So on my main chart where, I have everything, a big chart, and it's easy to look at, I leave these bubbles on, and I'll probably turn them off because when, you can see like here, these candles get covered by these bubbles. You can highlight over the candles and then you can actually see where they are, but it's not very user friendly. So really quick, just to get those candles off, and this will only be if you get if you pay Shorty for his TOS indicators. With his Discord, you'll be getting access to all of his indicators on TradingView. But so if you go into the indicators, what am I doing? edit studies, on the orbs, if you click on the gear, you just turn off. So here where it says show label, you just turn this to no. Show label, no. Show label, no. Show label, no. So any of the ones that say label, you just turn to no. And then click OK and apply. And then I guess I only turned off some of them, but it doesn't matter. On my flexible grid, I have all of them off because you don't really need them. We know this gray dashed line is the opening range 50. The red line is the opening range low. Green line is opening range high. And I can see the price levels here, and that's good enough. It's not blocking my my candlesticks, you know. Trend line is here a little bit, but that's okay. Anyway, so back to the main chart. For right now, I'm just going to turn those bubbles back on, the labels, just so it's easier for people to see. Oh, I guess these are the labels I missed. Show label fib. You would leave on show, you know, these ones here, all the way down to show label. And then all of these you can turn off if you don't want these little bubbles. Okay. And then this is an interesting thing to note. So if this is set to 0, your expansion area, which your TOS is set to no expansion on the right by default, you'll notice that my daily, weekly, and monthly pivots went away. So you have to click on this, the two arrows here, right expansion settings, change right expansion settings, and expansion area go down to 10 or 50 or whatever you want. Click apply and OK, and then you can see my daily pivot showed up here, and weekly pivot is here, the red line here. So with Shorty's method file, hopefully this is visible to you guys, but so crazy, Travis. So this volume profile, like I was saying, it's really nice because you have the volume and you can also see if it's trending above the 50 moving average. So this will give you, I didn't mute anybody, Jag. He muted himself. So just one more confluence point. If your volume is above this 50 moving average, you know, then you have really good volume. And then our triggers, you know, in this particular point on SPY, with Shorty, we're looking for the first 30-minute for our opening range high, opening range low, and the opening range 50. And so in this case, you know, the high of this candlestick here, I'm going to actually zoom in more. So if it is blurry, maybe you can see it better. So the high of this candle is going to be our opening range high, and the low of this candle here is going to be our opening range low. So those are two confluence points for taking entries. For me, the trading method is very simple. And I'm not saying that like, if it's not making sense to anybody, I'm not saying that to like make you feel bad or anything, but it's really not too complicated when you break it down and think about it. So I'm trying to get a zoom where we have everything on the screen. So again, dashed green line up here is the opening range high. dash red line here is the opening range low. This dash gray line, which might be hard for you guys to see, is the opening range 50. And then this red and green line here is going to be our trend line. And this VWAP here is VWAP with clouds. So Shorty doesn't use the actual center line of the VWAP as an indicator. He uses the outer cloud as his indicator for triggers. And so what I was saying before, and then also, sorry, this red line is the weekly pivot, and this blue line is the daily pivot. So any one of those can be used as a confluence point. So, here, right here in this area, we technically have 1, 2, 3 confluence points. So we have the trend bar, we have the VWAP, and we have the point of control, the POC. And then above that, we're going to have also the weekly pivot, and we also have the opening range 50. So for me, the best trigger that I'm seeing, and then also you have this green buy arrow. So that's another confluence point. So right here in this area, a lot of these candles could be viewed as a trigger. The first one that really pops out to me is going to be this candle here. The volume's pretty good. We have a buy indicator. We're above the trend line. We're above the VWAP. We're above the POC, and we cross above the weekly pivot. But so just here we have 1, 2, 3, 4 confluence points with a close above this POC, and we also have decent volume. So this candle here could technically be a trigger. But if you're looking for more confluence points, the even better trigger, and of course it works out perfectly, the even better trigger is going to be this one here, this candle here, where we have all of those other factors, but we also have a close above the weekly pivot and a close right at the opening range 50. But also down here, if you look at the volume, on that specific candle, it's the first candle where we're above the 50 moving average. So ultimately, this candle here is going to be a good trigger. This candle here is an even better trigger because we have a close above the opening range 50. And if we took either of these, we're in business. Your first trim is going to be here at the opening range high. Second trim will be here at the 272 fib level. Third trim is going to be here at the 618 fib level. And then, like I was saying, you could see that volume's dying down here, and you could ultimately exit the trade here somewhere, or even this candle, it touches the 618, and once you trim here, you're going to have that become your stop loss. And so when this candle came back down to the 618, you would just get, if you had any remaining contracts, you would just get out there. And you can see, this is not pre-planned. I just pulled up SPY. Our triggers, like I said, you could get in earlier here with less points of confluence, but really your best two candles as far as points of confluence are concerned is going to be this candle here or the candle right after it to enter the trade. So when this candle here closes, you could get in here on this candle. Or when this candle here closed, you could get on this candle. So either one of those would be great triggers, and you see 1, 2, 3 trims, you're up 60% at that point, and you're doing good. This is a 3-minute chart. So Shorty uses mostly the 3-minute chart, but sometimes he will use the 5-minute chart. And from what I'm seeing, if you have 4 or 5 confluence points on a trigger, even on the 3-minute chart, the likelihood of you getting faked out is pretty low. I only took one trade today, and I'll actually just show it to you guys. I didn't alert it because I was on my phone. I took... Where was it? I ended up taking plug right around here on this daily pivot. And took it up to the opening range high. Same thing. If we look at this chart, so on this candle here, if we're waiting for this candle to close, or even, here at the 50, opening range 50, the gray dashed line, this candle closes above it. So this candle here, when we retest the opening range 50, we can take the trigger, and then we can look at our confluence points. So we have a buy indicator here. We're above the trend line. We're above the VWAP. So right there we have 3 confluence points. We cross the opening range 50 and close above it. There's 4 confluence points. Right here we can take the trade comfortably. On this candle, like I said, when it retests the opening range 50, you get in, ride it up, first trim here, and your second trim would be at the 618, but we don't make it there quite. And we come back down, boom, you're going to exit the trade. You could exit the trade when you cross below the trend line, or you could, honor your stop loss at the opening range high, your first trim level. On this specific incidence, Cyber, the 3 confluence points are going to be, we have a buy indicator, we're above the trend line, we're above the VWAP, and then our 4th confluence point is going to be this close above the opening range 50, and we would get in on this candle after that. When it retests the opening range 50 right there, you would hit buy and then just ride this up. Take your first trim, opening range high, and try to get a second trim here at the 272 level. We don't quite make it. So when we don't quite make it, you can either use crossing below the trend line as your exit, or you can let it come down to the opening range high and use that as your stop loss. Either one of those two. Yes, the buy arrow is a confluence point. The close above here, let me try to zoom in. Hopefully you guys can see here. So right here on this candle, we close just slightly above the opening range 50. Our buy would be when this candle retests the opening range 50 here. That's when you would get in the trade. No problem. So unfortunately, like I said, I can't do anything about the blurriness. I'm sorry. Kind of sucks because you can't really see the charts very well if it's blurry. But and then if you took this trade, you have one more confluence point here where we cross the daily pivot. The only thing that's really not vibing for us is the volume. And the volume was kind of sketching me when I was in this trade because it wasn't moving very fast. But I stuck it out. And like I said, I traded on my phone, so I actually didn't have all of these indicators. I was just like, oh, plug looks like a buy right now. I'm going to try it, see what happens. And it worked out. But it's funny, I came and looked at the chart, and I literally happened to take the trade like right on this candle here, I believe it was. So it worked out pretty good. Does anybody have any questions? It should be pretty straightforward. Your stop is going to be, what Shorty says is if he enters at the opening range 50, his stop is going to be the opening range 50. For me, I'm not really vibing with that. I would, you know, like for me, I would be like, oh, if I cross below the VWAP or cross below the VWAP and the trend line, you know, that would be a good point to get out, to give yourself a little bit more wiggle room for a fake out, or for, you know, like being faked out of a trade that ends up being good. Like if it, you know, if we pretend like this is our trigger here and it pulls back and we happen to jump out here, but then it takes off, you know, you miss that trade from jumping out too early. So, you know, when you guys do get access to the indicators, you know, you really just want to go back and back test yourself and find these setups, you know, and you want to be honest with yourself. Like, is everything lining up, or am I just looking at what happens after the fact? And look for those triggers and see, like, you know, if I used the opening range 50 as my trigger and I also use it as my stop loss, would I have got stopped out of it? And in this case, we wouldn't. You know, we waited for a close above. On the retest of the opening range 50, we took the trade and it took off. We never came back down to the opening range 50. So you would have been good if you were using this opening range 50 as your stop loss. For me, I think that's a little bit too tight. But again, like, Shorty is a way better trader than me, so like, who am I to argue? But I would just say find what works for you. You know, just like with any trading, find what works for you. What works for Shorty might not work for me. It might work for somebody else. You know, the setups work. They're there. Like, there's no arguing. If you have 4 or 5 confluence points, as long as there's decent volume, the trade will work. Like, it just very rarely does it fake out if you have 4 or 5 confluence points. Yeah. And another thing that I've noticed that Shorty's talked about, I need to ask him about this, but, and I'm probably going to create my own indicator, but he was talking about master candles, being very powerful. It'll be very difficult for me to find one on here, because what a master candle is when you have an inside bar, that has, actually, this is a master candle. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yep. So let me, remove all of these so you guys can see here clearly what I'm looking at. So I'm zoomed in, so hopefully the blurriness isn't affecting too much for you guys. But so a master candle is going to be where you plot the high of that one candle and also plot the low of that one candle. And you have 5 candles that close within that range. And so in this case, or 5 or more, I should say. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the 6th one breaks below. So this can be used as a confluence point. If you have a master candle, which I said, like, again, these are hard to find because you need 5 candles that close with inside that one candle. If you have that and you have other confluence points that line up, you know, you could have took this trade to the downside. Here, you know, maybe a little bit of a fake out, but as long as your stop loss isn't too tight, this ends up paying off. And like I said, again, you're not going to just enter the trade on just the break of the master candle. You're going to want, you know, 3 or 4, or actually, sorry, you want at least 2 confluence points, 2 other confluence points. So you could have, you know, the break of this master candle plus it being below the VWAP and being below the trend line. And at that point, you could enter the trade. And maybe that doesn't happen until, you know, like over here or something. But you could have played puts here and it would have paid off. So this is just one more confluence point that I've noticed Shorty talking about. And like I said, I'm probably going to code my own indicator to draw in master candles whenever they do happen. Because, like I said, they will be hard to spot because it's 5 candles that close with inside this one candle. So I'm probably just going to recap everything really quick. So bear with me for a second while I get my studies back on here. You know, Doo-Doo, wow, that's a cool name. Volume should actually be probably like one of the number one factors in the trade. And I'm just showing, examples. I wasn't trading today, so I don't really know. Like I haven't looked at any charts from today. If anybody has a chart that I can look at, QQQ. Yeah, I mean this is about as good as it gets right here. So where was that candle I was looking at? Sorry. Right here, 8:30. So okay, we can check Affirm and AMD. We could look at PFE and Riot. Yeah, we can do all of that. Right now, let's look at QQQ. The best trigger I saw at a glance where there's volume is going to be this candle here, right at 8:30. So I'll tell you our confluence points. We're above the VWAP. We are above the, I want to say, weekly pivot. I don't have these colors down yet and my little bubbles off the screen, but actually, no, this is pink or red. This is the daily pivot. So we're above VWAP. We're above the daily pivot. We're above the trend line. And right here on this candle, you can see we have a massive volume spike and we're above that 50 moving average. So this is one confluence point. You could even technically say the volume spike plus this being above the 50 moving average is 2 confluence points. But we're just going to call it 1. Above the VWAP, there's 2. Above our daily pivot, there's 3. Above our trend line, there's 4. And we close above the opening range high. There's 5. And then we basically retest right here. This is where you would enter the trade on this candle here when we come down, retest, and you take this up. You're going to trim at 272, 618, and you'll be able to trim at the 2% as well. So, I mean, this is as good as it gets right here. This candle, everything lines up. The only thing that we don't have is we don't have a buy signal on the trend line, but we have so many confluence points that doesn't even matter. So again, we have this volume spike and it's above the 50 moving average. We're above the daily pivot. We're above the VWAP. We're above the trend line. We close above the opening range high. And when we retest the opening range high, we would enter the trade, trim 272. Trim 618, and then trim 2%. And then, yeah, I mean, right here, you would end up getting out where you start chopping sideways. If you had more contracts after your what is it? 1, 2, 3, third trim. If you were still holding more contracts after your trim here, a few things. You could, when you break the trend line here, you could exit the trade completely. Or when you start chopping sideways and you see that volume is kind of going down and it's red, you could just exit completely here. Yes. So what Jag just said. So if you enter the trade here on this retest, excuse me, and you take a trim here at the 272 Fibonacci level, this 272 Fibonacci level becomes your new stop loss. And you can see here, like, we never cross it. We come close, but then we go all the way up 618. 618 becomes your new stop loss, and technically you would have stopped out on this candle if you use the 618 as your new stop loss. If you didn't let that wick get you out, you would have been able to take your third trim at the 2% Fibonacci level. I'm going to stop the video here really quick, the recording I'm making for YouTube, because we don't need to see, 16 examples of charts and make the video super long. So I'm just going to cut it here, but we'll go over more charts.